I've done it, Liz. Yeah.
Wonderful. We're on the case now. Right. Well, welcome. This is Black History Conversations. We're really getting through season 12 now. Quite unbelievable. We started way back when. And I'm just going to show you the PowerPoint and introduce myself. I'm Liz Millman from Learning Links International. And we have with us Garrick Prayog from Windrush Generations. He's a member of Learning Links team as well, as is another founder of Learning Links International, Natalie Fagan Brown. So it's really, really good to have you all here. Okay, so let me just say that we've got. Now I'm going to ask Lamesha to pronounce the name of her organisation.
It's Blemme Fatale Productions.
Right, wonderful. So welcome to you, and perhaps I better ask you, Joseph, if you wouldn't mind introducing where you're from, because my Jamaican accent's not good enough to pronounce this.
Well, I think we should prove that first, Liz.
Oh, should you? All right, then
Yeah.
we'll get on to that later. So we've got Lamesha Ruddock and Dr. Joseph Farquharson joining us today to talk about Jamaican language. So I hope we're going to have some Jamaican being spoken between all the folks who are with us. Okay, but welcome to Black History Conversations. I'm, as I say, Liz Millman, one of the directors of Learning Links International. I'm actually in Australia at the moment, so I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I live at present, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Possibly next week we may actually have somebody from the First Nations here in Victoria to talk with us about some of the quite dramatic steps forward that are being taken here. We've had ups and downs over the time we've been talking about the first recognition of the first Australians here. But we decided that Black History Conversations also should have an acknowledgement, acknowledging the injustice of the actions taken by the British and other European countries that invaded and took possession of the islands of the Caribbean Sea, as well as the continents of North and South America. And in addition, we recognise the exploitation of the great continents of Africa, Asia and Australia, and the many other parts of the world in the centuries of colonialisation and ongoing exploitation. And we acknowledge that this resulted in the destruction and destabilisation of so many nations, peoples and cultures. But perhaps we also ought to recognise the many fantastic things that African people have managed to do and their descendants have managed to do in many parts of the world. So and today's talk is presentations are a little bit about this. It's also the International Decade for People of African Descent. So there's loads that you can read up about that. And as it's the last year of the decade, we'll be looking at what goes on next, but we'll also be looking at what happened past. Now, if you want to make an acknowledgement at any time, be prepared to say what you're doing and join the conversation or ask a question. And before joining us, just to say our working website is www.blackhistoryconversations.com. We are hoping to get our new website one day up and running. Got another little issue causing us to stall at the moment though. So Black History Conversations started way back in October 2020 during COVID as the world reeled from witnessing George Floyd's murder. And we've completed 11 seasons. This is our 12th, managed by Learning Links International, and we're very grateful to the many individuals who have joined us and the organisations who've given us support, especially our speakers today. I'm usually the person who introduces the sessions, along with Garrick Prayog and June Elizabeth sends her apologies today. And Simon Fringo does wonderful things, recording and posting. So we've now got a real good collection of information. So we don't have Zoom registration. Emails in the chat, switch off microphones unless you're speaking. We're not too fussy if it's only a small group of us. You can switch off your camera at any time, especially if you're moving around, and we recognise that the subject material can be emotive and at times quite confrontational, and we're happy to talk through any issues offline. So last week we had Alan Lester join us to talk about the book that's coming out in June, The Truth About Empire, The Real Histories of British Colonialisation. And if ever there's a time that this is needed, it's now, when such rubbish is being spoken about in terms of our past history of Britain. The week before we had Professor Celia Naylor join us from Columbia University to discuss on silencing slavery, telling the truths about Rose Hall Plantation. And she really inspired the North Wales Jamaica Society, the Penance Project, and the North Wales Jamaica Society to really look at the Penance Project information. Then the week before that, we had Antinuka. She's joined us to tell us about her brilliant book, Brilliant Black British History. It was an absolute classic. I've done a bit of research since then, discovered that I didn't know anything about this, but they've made a replica of what the Cheddar Man 10,000 years ago would have looked like, as the evidence now available through DNA indicates he had blue eyes, dark skin, and dark curly hair. That's quite good, and put links there. And we finished last time. I've included this one. Finished the last series season when Dr. Kurt Henry joined us from the Institute of Jamaica Memory Bank. So on to today. Fantastic. So I just wanted to point out, though, that the languages of the Caribbean are most modern foreign languages in the world and bring grammatical features from languages in West Africa, Western and Central Africa, with vocabulary from the European sailors, enslavers, plantation overseers, mixed with local Caribbean and African words. I actually found this statement when I was researching about the work that Learning Links had done about Jamaican languages a long while back. And it's essential that as some of the most modern languages in the world, these languages had such dramatic origins, and these languages are now recognised, respected and studied. So in bold, this isn't a session to discuss whether the languages developed in the Caribbean are languages or not. So we're going to ask Lamesha now to tell us about a project that Natalie and I were involved in a little bit as historians. Over to you then. It's lovely that you're here with us, and you're over in Canada at the moment, and this is really exciting. So brilliant.
Hi everyone. I just also want to start with a land acknowledgement because I'm in Canada, Toronto, Turtle Island. This land was originally held by, or like stewarded by, the Mississaugas of the Credits, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat Confederacy. And this land is governed by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon, One Spoon Belt Covenant. Now I had to learn that in my first month being here because I realized people don't actually know the land they're on. And I think the theme of the Dish with One Spoon really comes through the community work and the ideas that I try to promote. The idea that we're sharing everything, we're breaking bread to share everything in community because we live in community, we live in society. And that comes through with my production company, Blemme Productions, which is a theatre and events company that promotes Black diasporic history creatively, mainly through the medium of theatre. And I worked on a really exciting project with Liz and Natalie, and I was just so blessed that I found them on the internet. And it was a project called In I Suit You, and it's a historical research and theatre making project where I worked with a cohort of young teenagers of Caribbean heritage in London to research the history, write their own play and put on a production, and also deliver an ebook. And the production was called In I Suit You. We performed it at Streatham Space Project in Streatham in London back in September. And the premise was a group of young people are tasked with rebooting Miss Lou Bennett's iconic TV show Ring Ding. And I know Ring Ding was done again with Ring Ding Again, but it's about a diaspora spin of the Jamaican history in the diaspora and what they're yearning for and what's been denied to them. From the conversation, we had a series of workshops from dub poetry, creative writing, and our history sessions with Liz and Natalie. And the conversations that came out of that about like, in I suit you, the idea that this language doesn't suit them is something they had been, from their elders to the media to what, to not even classifying as a language, that kind of mentality had been sprung into their head over and over again. And it had an initial wall for them to speak patois. But by the end of the session of the project, they were performing patois on stage, they were doing Q&As, they were speaking to the history. And then even at the ebook launch, where they all did write-ups on prominent Caribbean lyricists, from John Agard to Bob Marley to Yasser Safari to Joan Andrea Hutchinson, to Muta Baruka, they all could speak to that history, write it, source it, and that was really fulfilling. So now I realized I did London, but there's a hotspot in Toronto, there's a hotspot in New York. I need to go to Toronto. I also have family here. So I've come to Toronto now to continue the project. And then in the March break, I did the Jamaican National Language Supplementary School. And we produced a workbook from that, which was heavily influenced from like the book Natalie and Liz gifted me from the end of that project, Out to Write, the Jamaican Language Unit from the University of West Indies, like, to the research we did on around the paddy wars in Toronto. And this was this scandal in February 1985. They wanted to get rid of the word paddy. You couldn't use beef patty to call a beef patty what it is. They wanted to call it like a pasty or like a pie, in fact. And just by trying to change the language of what we call stuff was essentially attack on us. So, and then the way the people responded, it was like overruled in like 2 weeks. So it's just about how us Jamaicans, we can mobilize to defend our language when we want to. And then also about the history of Caribana. So I've just been like, really just like assimilating myself into the history here, going to all the archives. The Miss Lou archives is at McMaster University. So just like, and then there's a great like Caribana fund at the Clara Thomas archives at York University. So it's just been mainly researching, and now I'm getting into I'm soon going to announce I'm going to be doing some oral history roundtables in Toronto for my next step of my project. And I'm also presenting at the Jamaican Diaspora Conference, this project, in June. It's June 16th to 19th.
Fantastic. So you'll be over in Jamaica for that?
I don't think I can hack the flight. Might be a Zoom.
Oh, right. Well, that's fantastic. Okay then. Well, that was a whistle-stop tour around what you're doing, and it's fascinating to hear about this hotspot in Toronto. It really is a hotspot, and I know it's somewhere where work's been done over the years on Jamaican as a language. So I'm really interested to hear about the Jamaica Language Supplementary School. That's just fascinating. Okay, I think what we'll do now is give Joseph a chance to introduce yourself and perhaps update us a little bit about the all the things that seem to be going on from the Jamaica Language Unit.
Thanks a lot, Liz. I do remember that you have not pronounced the name of the unit in Jamaican yet, not letting you off the hook. So thanks very much for inviting me. I just wanted to, am I adding something? Because we started out with acknowledgements. And Liz, you had a slide that spoke about Caribbean languages being modern. And I thought that it, framing it that way, kind of forgets the original inhabitants of the region, who, are the original owners of the land. So we're talking about the Arawaks, the Caribs, and so on, whose languages are, are very old. And so, we could say the Creole languages of the Caribbean
I understand what you're saying, and I apologize for that, and I should have known better. But it's interesting because I picked that out from something that we wrote so long ago, and I think if I'd have written it for off as to now, perhaps I would have realized that. But of course, there are many languages of the original people of the Caribbean. So, yes, but you would refer to the more modern ones that were created after the 1600s, that you would refer to those as the Creole languages of the Caribbean.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think
thank you.
that would take care of that. Okay, so we're in a very interesting period of the development of the language. And I'm going to start with a survey, an all-island survey that the Jamaican Language Unit conducted in 2005. It's called the Language Attitude Survey of Jamaica, and it's available on the website of the Jamaican Language Unit, which is a sub of the University of the West Indies MONA website. Now, that language attitude survey was conducted by Professor Hubert Devonish, who was then coordinator of the Jamaican Language Unit. He's also the founder. I believe Dr. Karen Carpenter also played a role in it. And it was done through the course we call language planning, which is a third year undergraduate course, which Professor Devonish himself created in order to fill a gap in Caribbean linguistics, a much needed gap for these languages that need to be built out for use in domains other than the ones in which we're accustomed to using them. Now, I believe Professor Devonish himself was blown away, and all of us have been blown away by the results of that survey. It's very easy for you, especially if you're in the fight, to not know that the fight, the battle is going in your favor. You know, so if you're looking in your immediate environment and you're seeing members of your army fall, it looks as if you're losing the battle. But the language attitude survey gave us a much broader picture of what was happening. And it told us that attitudes to the language were much more evolved and evolved in the positive direction than we had imagined before. When asked which, languages they spoke, a lot of people identified both English and Jamaican as their languages. And this is progress because several decades before, people would have cited themselves as being speakers of English, understanding Jamaican to be just a bastardized version of English. But people were now claiming that they were speakers of English and speakers of Jamaican. Over 70% of people said that they were speakers of Jamaican. When people were asked if Jamaican is a language, over 70% of respondents responded in the affirmative. And then surprisingly, the battleground, which is where it seems as if we were always losing, education. When people were asked, given two schools, one school in which children are taught only in English, and another school in which children are taught in English and Jamaican. By the way, the survey used Patois, it didn't use Jamaican. Which school would you send your child to? And the majority of people said the bilingual school, and that blew our minds. Because up to that point, we thought, there was still an uphill battle with that hill being, at a 90-degree angle for the use of the language in education. And that is where English has generally been jealously guarded, Okay, Jamaican is good for culture. We can do the Miss Lou thing. We can do folk tales and so on. But schools, English. And although for decades, linguists like Dennis Craig, linguists like Hubert Devonish, Velma Pollard, Ian Robertson, etc., have been saying, look, the best thing for us to do is to
Oops, I'm missing the connection. Joseph, just try and get back to us, will you? Oh dear, this is difficult. Right, I'm not quite
It's a
sure
break
what's
in the
happening.
signal.
Yeah.
Do you have a link of that survey that he did?
I don't have a link to that. He said it was on the University of the West Indies website. We could have a look for it while
Yes.
we're waiting for him to get back and get in. I hope he realizes that we need to.
It's frozen. It's frozen out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's frozen out. Oh no, he's gone, so he'll come back in again. That's fine. That's lovely. Okay, I was just going to have a look for the University of the West Indies website, but I have to get it up first. University. Oops, a daisy. As if I haven't got enough problems. My keyboard's playing up one of the keys. Tell me if it pops back up, will you? I'll see if we can find where it is. Right, here I am. Let's go back into the site. So, right, where were we looking at then?
Okay. Seems as if
Oh, you're back again, are you? Lovely.
Yeah. I'm on the University of Köln's internet here.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, so
you were telling us about some of the leading.
Yes. So interestingly, yes, Jamaica is a signatory to the convention, the UNESCO convention that mentions the the need for mother language education, or the preference for mother language education, or education in the mother language. But of course, that has been ignored. Now, interestingly, and here I am still talking about things being much further advanced than we think, because we're in the thick of the battle. Just by chance, in about, was it 2020 or 2019, two community organizers in the parish of St. Elizabeth, well, they're not living in St. Elizabeth, they go back and forth, but they do a lot of their organizing in St. Elizabeth, approached the Jamaican Language Unit to provide support for teachers in several St. Elizabeth schools, bilingual education, mother language education. And Professor Hubert Devonish and I started building out something for them. Out of that has come a Master of Arts program in dual language practice in education. The program is written, it's ready, it has just not gone through the university's approval as yet. And we also need funding because we are afraid that a lot of the teachers will not be able to afford the program, and so they will not do it, although they need to do it. So we are trying to seek funding for it. Now, while we were preparing to do that, just by chance, Professor Devenish came upon, or he went to check the National Standards Curriculum. The National Standards Curriculum was implemented in 2018, and that is a curriculum that governs education in Jamaica from grades 1 to 9. And lo and behold, he found this at the early stages of education. The curriculum says, has as one of its attainment goals that children should be able to read and write in both languages. Okay, like this is the best kept secret ever. So we took that, we ran with it. This is how the master's program got created. Now, however, we haven't heard anything from the government re-implementing this. And later on, we found out that it appears that there is really no strong push to fully implement the national standards curriculum. And so what we have really is the same old, same old. The curriculum was done by a foreign consultant who clearly was informed by the literature, the available literature in education and linguistics, but the government doesn't seem to be committed to full implementation. And so we're trying to see what we can do to have it fully implemented. So yes, things are not as bad as we have thought. I should point out that last year, I think everybody here might know that the Jamaican government is looking at leaving the monarchy behind and becoming a republic. And the government set up a constitutional reform committee to look at, what would be needed to prepare for that switchover. The committee reached out to the Jamaican Language Unit last year and asked us to present on, the role of language in the new republic, and we did so. In fact, the presentation we did was really a reaffirmation of the call that Professor Devenish had made in 2001 when a joint select committee of parliament was looking at the Charter of Rights, and he had asked for freedom from discrimination on the ground of language to be included in the Charter of Rights. Now, the committee thought that it was an interesting idea. They were not opposed to it, but I appreciated that that would come with some legal obligations, and especially because the language had not been formalized, had not been standardized, etc. They asked for a unit to be set up at the university to look about the standardization of the language, and that unit was the Jamaican Language Unit. So going into this 2023 meeting of the committee, we reiterated that. So for freedom from discrimination on the ground of language to be included in the Constitution, but we also asked for the Jamaican language to be made co-official with English, and that languages such as Jamaican Sign Language, Country Sign, Chromanti used by the Maroons, and Maroon Spirit Language, or deep Maroon Creole, be recognized as heritage languages in Jamaica. And so I think that's the broad update from the Jamaican Language Unit.
Well, I think that's absolutely amazing. And I think the way that you've thought of of saying when you're in the battle, you don't realise that you're on you're getting there, you're winning.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely amazing, and so many things coming together. And interestingly, when we were chatting before, I was saying it might be useful to make a link with Wales, because Wales has had to battle to get official recognition of its very old language. And now there's an expectation that information is presented in English, in Welsh as well as in English. And it's quite seriously an issue. You can't put up posters, for example, in the University of Bangor unless they're bilingual. I had to learn this the hard way because I spend time in Wales, and I'm not a Welsh speaker, unfortunately, although half my heritage is Welsh. But that's interesting. But the expense of it is astronomical. And it makes it difficult sometimes for you to do things that you'd like to do because you have to have the translated information available as well. Wow, that's absolutely fantastic. Lamesha, do you want to come in to ask anything of
I think
Joe?
someone's got their hand up there.
Well, never mind. You go first. Gareth will let you go first.
I think it's super good, like what's being done in our home in Jamaica, because it all starts in Jamaica. If the language isn't validated back home, how will the diaspora know that it's okay to teach their kids? Or like, I feel like the culture of Jamaica and patois not being validated, that is creating all these ripple effects of people not knowing their home or not knowing, because like I'm second generation, but when you get to third, fourth, fifth generation, that's when people lose it. And especially if you don't have the language, you'll lose it. And especially if you don't have people back home, you'll lose it. And it's just, you'll turn into these new generation, like Italian Americans or Irish Americans, and you're just clinging on to a memory or a saying. So I think language is just an easy way to like root yourself home. Yeah. But I wonder, like, well, what is this? What would you say is like, what are the evidence that like that I could use as well that like learning both Jamaican and English can improve like literacy rate, like education rates, just like, yeah. Could you speak to that a bit more?
Okay, so my short-term memory is very bad. So you have to remind me of the question. I just wanted to address one other thing. Don't look at it from the perspective of Jamaica having to drive the change. Why? All of the Jamaicans in the meeting now, especially those who have been around for much longer than I have, will know that there's something about the Jamaican psyche which causes us to kind of delay acceptance of a lot of our cultural products until people from outside have accepted them. Yeah? And so I think those Jamaicans in the diaspora, especially second generation, third generation people, are important in this struggle because one of the most significant supports for the continuation and the development of a language is its desirability. Its desirability by people outside of the national boundaries. And so it's really the international desire for Jamaican culture, whether that be reggae, dancehall, Jamaican language, which is driving a lot of this, because the more people out there say, hold on, and you know, colonialism has really done a number on us. That even though we are sitting on gold in terms of Rastafari, in terms of Jamaican foods. Patty, and I'm sure you must have heard about the opening of Juicy Patties in, was it Miami? And first
Sold
week,
out.
in the first week, they had to put out a notice to say, hey, and now in Jamaica, people thought, oh, patty, nobody abroad wants to eat patties, People abroad want to go and eat a nice, pizza, etc., etc. But look at what happened. So it really needs everybody in the struggle. And I think the support, the work of people like yourself on the outside also adds to that, because we get alternative voices saying this thing is good. It has value. And when Jamaicans at home hear that, they themselves become more convinced of the value of the language. Now, in terms of you asked for proof, was that it?
Yeah, I was just asked because I feel like a big argument is that just learning two languages distinctly will just help you improve your English and your Jamaican. And yeah, we'll just improve literacy skills.
Well, so we are currently involved. This is Jamaican Language Unit and the International Center for Caribbean Language Research. Currently involved in a series of workshops with the St. Elizabeth teachers. So because the master's program is taking so long, we are doing something over about 7 weeks to teach them the fundamentals. And in the first session or so on, we had to kind of unpack a lot of those, ideologies, and something came home forcefully. Somebody mentioned mathematics. You have the numerator and the denominator. Is it the numerator? I've forgotten my primary school mathematics. Yes.
Numerator.
And the denominator. And the person was saying that this person, I can't remember if it was a master teacher or so on, kept on insisting that the children use the mathematical concepts. They must say denominator. There was a child who was saying bottom number. No, that did several things. One is that it took the English terms to be the mathematical terms. I said, no, but I mean, these terms can be expressed in Spanish, can be expressed in French, and several other languages. I don't know, somebody rang my bell and at the wrong time.
Okay, well, let you do that then do you want to sort that out?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a really interesting point. Lamesha, what I'm going to talk about is a term that was used by one of our team once, and it always seemed a useful term for me, and that was the term bilingual. You see, je parle français un peu. I speak French a bit. I also speak English. So I'm a bit bilingual. I can speak French, I can speak English. And because Jamaican has this difference of the continuum between English and deep rural Jamaican, and you can speak in any way along it, the term bilingual isn't necessarily absolutely useful. Looks as if he's rushing around there. So, so, um, so I think that might be worth having a little think about, because one of the reasons that I can't pronounce Jamaican is that I never made any attempt at all to speak Jamaican, because if I spoke Jamaican as a non-Jamaican, sometimes it could be a bit offensive. I tried it a bit to begin with. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting one, because it was almost as if Jamaican, it's your language and you speak it, and you're English, you don't speak it. There was interesting discussion there.
Yeah, but maybe it's you thinking it doesn't suit you. I see you. But I feel like
Yes,
a huge
in the
thing was,
company.
yeah, a huge thing about it was like like people desire Jamaican patois. Like the amount of white people that pay people to learn patois is crazy. I just saw a patois interpreter in Nottingham going around last couple of weeks, paying really well, remote work as well. So this is just like Jamaicans. This is like a special skill you have if you come, if you, especially if you leave Jamaica, like because no one else speaks Jamaican patois but Jamaicans. That you can become like an interpreter. Like Nathy talks about the work she does as well, and you can also teach the language, and just yeah, it's just like it's a huge like economic world that could just bring more money into people's pockets, especially Jamaicans.
Mm.
Yeah.
Garrick, I'm not calling you in yet. Or I wait until Joseph comes back? Is that all right? Yes, I think it is really interesting because just the whole thing about acknowledgement that Jamaican is a language and it's a different way of speaking, and we can explain a little bit perhaps about why we actually started doing things. Okay, Joseph, you're all right.
It seems as if they timed me. They waited until I was in the session. Um,
Okay, we were just talking about one point, and that was that one of our team at one stage used the term bilingual.
mhm,
And I was just saying I can speak a bit of French and I speak English, so I could be said to be bilingual. I know when I'm speaking English and know when I'm speaking French, although sometimes we do mix the two languages.
mhm,
But Jamaican is different because Jamaica's has the continuum between Jamaican as it's spoken in the rural bush and English, standard Jamaican English. And you can speak anywhere along it. And I was just saying that I never wanted to try to learn to speak Jamaican, which is why I didn't even attempt to pronounce that. But
mhm,
people would laugh at me because Yassus Afari, who I worked with quite a lot, would speak to me and I would reply to him in English because I'd understood what he said.
mhm,
And they said, "You understand though, Liz, you don't speak Jamaican, but you understand." And
mhm.
that was kind of an interesting one. Anyway, back over to you and what you were
Yeah,
responding to,
so
Joseph.
I was given the denominator story. So the child
Mhm.
said bottom number. And then I went and looked up, online dictionary, the definition for denominator. And it says, the number at the bottom of the thing there. And I think in all of my years, the concept finally made sense to me. Like, the denominator, I know it. At some level, I know it. But I didn't understand it really until I heard the concept. I also had a situation, and this is a story I've told, numerous times. Somebody must have written it down somewhere now. Uh, a friend of mine having invited me to observe her primary school class, a grade 4 class. There was a little boy there who got into trouble. Um, and, she put him in the corner to sit and whole thing. She said he's frustrated and she thinks that language is the source of his frustration. In the afternoon, she gave mathematics problems on the board. And she repeated the instructions orally in English. So the instructions are on the board in English. She repeats them orally in English, and he's just sitting there. And so I go over to him and say, okay, let us do them together. How much is 5 plus 10? And he's just guessing wildly, like 13. And up to that point, I'd say, but this is numbers. This is not language. This is not English. This is numbers. So there should be no problems. Once I saw that, I did two things. I created scenarios for him and I switched the language. So I said, yeah, 5 mango, your friend them give you 10 more mango. How much mango you got? 15. He got every single one right. His eyes lit up. I was looking at a boy who was in class for years not understanding much, and who more than likely had started to believe that he was stupid. He now found himself understanding what was going on and getting the things right. And I could see that his entire lease on life had changed. Now, somebody like him is going to be ruled out by the system as having learning challenges. And I thought about how many other children like him exist in the system. So we have been saying for years, start off in the mother language because the child is familiar with this. And everywhere. So there's a discussion going on in Jamaica now, well, quiet discussion about the PISA results. I keep on forgetting what PISA stands for, but it's one of these international standards for evaluating, how well children are doing. And the Jamaican scores are abysmal. And of course they're abysmal. If you look at the countries that are doing well, in all of those countries, children are being taught and are being assessed in their mother language. And if you look at within the countries, non-immigrant children do better than immigrant children. Why? Because non-immigrant children are being taught and assessed in their own language, whereas the immigrant children are being assessed in somebody else's language. And so there are indications all around that children do best when they start their education. And I could feel it too because I've lived, several years of my life abroad, Germany. And I can say I have a decent grasp of English, but I do get the sense that many of my German counterparts have a slightly better grasp of English than I do. This is because they knew from the get-go that English was not their language. They were taught English as a second language. And so they end up having a better grasp of it than many Jamaicans who have English in their environment, but they're kind of in this mode, where the switch is not really on and it's not really off. And so enough power isn't going to the machine. I'll stop there. I get excited when I...
It's great when you're excited. I'm going to let Garrick come in now, if it's relevant, your point, Garrick. I'm not being rude there.
Very interesting. Just listening to what Joseph have said. Most of us went to school in Jamaica, whether that would be in the 50s or 60s or 70s. We're taught English in school. We're using English books. But when I was going to school, there was a few books with non-English, probably say Jamaican illustration, Jamaican patois. And parents would read these books to these children in the Jamaican patois and leave out the English, or maybe that was the first words that they heard from the patois from their mother before they went to school and get an introduction to English. And naturally, I think that should be the way, to start with your mother tongue. But a couple of things that came out of your conversation just now in relation to the development of a standard for Jamaica language, which we're not there yet, but it's a work in progress. I'm always surprised when I hear people talk about Jamaican language in English rather than talk about Jamaican language in patois. And it's this going, all right, we're developing a patois, yes, but all the academic research and structure is presented in English. And I think that should not be the way. Because if we're going to encourage the language of patois, we have to demonstrate that language to people. And I listen to our parliament in Jamaica, our prime minister, and they're all talking the English. You see, I've never heard any of them start to talk about the patois language, or I go on down there, so on and so forth. I never hear any of that, right?
Except on the
So
campaign.
it's almost okay. It's not good enough to come into parliament, right? It's not good enough to present to the world. Then tell me, what's the purpose of developing a language? You see? So I would ask that question, but also in relation to the arts, because you mentioned right at the outset, the arts are a very powerful way of introducing the language and the culture. Yeah, you mentioned the music. It's there. It's all there. You see, all the artists are actually singing, and they're doing it, in the language. You see, and the audience that's listening, whether in Jamaica or abroad, are understanding it from the patois being sung and the song that they're singing. So there's no issue. People are getting the understanding. They're getting the sense of what the artist is talking about in the patois language. See? So the artists don't have to put it in English, right? They're already getting it. And that should be a component in how the languages develop. Whatever standard is agreed, you cannot leave out, that patois, because it is understood all over the world, right? Even more than we think it does, because I used to work in the youth club, and because I'm the only Black worker in the youth club, all the white children used to speak Jamaican to me. They used to come and they used to say, "Wagwan, yeah, you have any weed?" They would speak that to me because it's in the culture, And I didn't speak it back to them, but I was curious to say to them, "Where did you get this from?" And it all came from the music. All came from the music. So there is something about how do we progress the language, develop our own take on the language, not trying to create the standard to the European standard, whatever that may be, but how we actually, because France, when the French minister come to England, he never tried to speak English. He will always speak his French. Wherever he go, he speak his French. When the German come to England or anywhere else, they'll always speak their German. They speak their French. So when the Jamaican come to England, we should be expecting Jamaican to speak his language, if he have one. And he does have one, but it hasn't become international as yet.
Eric, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. It's really interesting to have you as someone who learned, you spoke Jamaican in school and then learned it in Jamaica with your family and then moved to the UK. So it's really interesting the mix of folks we've got in the UK. And as you say, with so many different languages. Do you want to come back on some of those points first, and then we'll ask Robert to come in?
All right. So quickly, yes, you're correct. So we have had different stages of the battle for the language. And you have to remember that for much of the history of this battle, it has really been about convincing the power brokers that this thing is valuable. the people themselves, I think, only started thinking that their language was not good enough, etc., because they were told that. So it was really, and two, because certain benefits would be denied them, you know. So in order to get a job in certain places, you have to speak English. If there are no jobs associated with the language, if there are, you know, scholarships associated with the language, then the speakers are going to take their cue from that and then will abandon the language. And so it has really been, to a large extent, trying to convince the power brokers. Now, Miss Lou was important in the work. And this is because Miss Lou took the work of linguists and fashioned it in a way that the public could understand. And so Miss Lou was reading people like Frederick Cassidy and Robert LePage, was reading the early linguists who worked on the language, Beryl Bailey also, and then distill that for the audience. So I think it really needs many voices in the space in order to do the work that needs to be done. Professor Hubert Devonish is not Jamaican, he's Guyanese. Guyanese Creole is close enough to Jamaican, but he has generally, you know, avoided trying to sound like Jamaican or etc. Now that I'm in the chair, I have done presentations in the language, so about the language in the language. So I did a presentation to the Kiwanis Club about the language in education, and that was done completely in Jamaican. When we celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Jamaican Language Unit, my presentation was done in Jamaican. Professor Caroline Cooper did her inaugural lecture as a professor in Jamaican. Professor Hubert Devonish has written an article in the language. I know Professor Cooper also has an article or parts of an article in the language. And I have been planning for a little while now. I think a 2-volume set, depending on how much response we get, which will present academic papers on any subject: chemistry, physics, linguistics, literature, history, culture, etc., in the Jamaican language, peer-reviewed, etc. So we're getting there little by little. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're getting there little by little. I think there was another point that
yes, Robert wanted to ask you something. So thank you very much for what you just said. That was fascinating. Yeah, Robert?
Well, yes, fascinating is the word. I mean, I've got about 250 questions I wish to ask. Can I just say that the little boy who got put in the corner, he would have, in a British school, he would have been defined as educationally subnormal. And hundreds of little boys and girls who came to Britain in the 50s and 60s and the 70s were defined as educationally subnormal and therefore put into educational streams that really further disabled them. Whereas in fact they were linguistically handicapped. They weren't stupid. They didn't have something wrong with their brain, which was assumed by many British teachers and educational authorities. And one question that I'd find, well, I'd like to hear the answer to, and I don't know whether Garrick or others know the answer to this, is when supplementary schools were set up in the United Kingdom for children who'd been marginalized or defined as educationally subnormal, were those supplementary classes conducted in English or in patois or in a mixture of the two? Now, when I've got the answer to that, I've got a second question, but I'll leave that for the moment.
Okay, then. Well, I'm going to come in.
I can give you the answer to that because I sat in sessions of Saturday school back in Brixton in the 70s. And yes, they were done in both. They were done in the Jamaican language and also in English, because what we had to do was really to capture the attention of the pupil and the imagination of the pupil in order to actually start to explain to them, you know, certain words and meaning, because that was the issue that they, you know, sitting in the classroom, it's almost was foreign language to them. They could, you know, it went over their head, and nobody took the time to even slow down and to break it into bite size. So, you know, those teachers were able to actually do that in the patois and then in the English. So they dip in and out in order for the child to understand.
I think that's a great response there. And it's, Joseph, you come back on that then.
Yeah, and the Jamaican child in that situation is dealing with two issues, because that Jamaican child in a Jamaican classroom is probably having difficulties understanding the teacher because the teacher is speaking in English, yeah, where the child's home language is Jamaican. I mean, they're catching words, and that's what makes it even more dangerous. They're catching words that sound like words they know, but those words may not have the same meanings, may not be doing the same things. And then you now put them in England, where they have to deal with English, but now listening to a teacher speaking English with an accent that they're not familiar with. So it's even worse.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting thing that you're saying there, Joseph, because I spent quite a lot of time in schools in Jamaica over the time when I was coming back and forth. And I think that Jamaican teachers are absolutely brilliant. And I think that Jamaican teachers have been taking it into their own hands to talk to their class in a way that they understand. Because I don't speak Jamaican, and at that stage I didn't understand Jamaican either. So I would be the person who didn't understand what the teacher was saying. And I know that, say, at Shortwood Teachers College, the teachers were not allowed to speak patois on site. They were supposed to just speak English. And so the teachers are so used to, this isn't just my opinion, and I've not said this before actually, but I think that the teachers, because they know their students, and when you're communicating with somebody, you communicate in a way that you're going to get the message over. And I think that was very evident. So the students, but the writing on the board would be all in English. And so there was this disconnect going on. And so we talked about it a little bit in the sort of training sessions where I was introducing English language storybooks. Look, I was asked, that was what I was instructed to do. It wasn't my own wish. But anyway, yeah, Joseph, come back.
And the problem exists in the legal system and in the healthcare system. Healthcare, and this happens over and over, and I heard about cases the other day where nurses were telling trainee nurses or reprimanding trainee nurses for speaking to patients in patois. And what will generally happen is that a doctor will talk to a patient and say, okay, Mr. So-and-so-on, remember that you should take these pills, you know, so many times a day, and you should do you understand? And the patient says, Yes, doctor. And then once the doctor moves away, the patient turns to either the nurse or the porter and in Jamaican says, what did he say? Or what did she say? And that happens over and over. In the legal system too, that's also a problem. And it's bad because non-Jamaicans have more rights in the justice system than Jamaicans do. Because although the Constitution allows you, if your first language is not English, to ask for an interpreter, if a Jamaican asks for an interpreter, he or she would be laughed out of court. And I was in court, I think it was last year, and saw, well, a lot of the resident magistrates are now accommodating. And so they will speak to people in Jamaican. But a Chinese national was brought before the court because he was selling knockoff goods. His sentencing had to be done in Jamaican because the man didn't understand English. Jamaican was the language of his trade because that's the language of his customers. He's now before the courts and his sentencing had to be done in Jamaican so that he'd be able to understand it. Anyway, I'll stop there. I see Robert and...
No, I think the points that you're making are very good. One of the things we wondered about, because we worked with people who were working in courts in the UK, you know, this is back in the day, as I've said before, we thought perhaps the term explainer, can somebody explain an explainer, as a new category of professional, because Jamaicans in Britain and in Jamaica consider that they speak English. And so, you know, if you ask, you know, do you want a translator? Do you want somebody to explain? So that was one idea that we came up with. Robert, okay, next question then. And
Yes.
then we're not going to go on too long because I'm aware that both Joseph and Lamesha have got so many other things that you're doing as you're away from home. Okay, Robert.
Yes, just shifting the ground slightly, Joseph. I mean, teaching in higher education in Britain, I found increasingly towards the end of my career that had significant numbers of British-born, white, working-class students who had difficulty understanding the vocabulary and the usage of what I would call standard English. And I had students complaining that I was using long words, which I wasn't aware of. And actually, some students complained to my head of department that I was expecting them to read books, to which he replied, well, go away and read them. But one of the issues I noticed towards the end of my career, because I've been retired 25 years now, was the way in which the language of immigrants or the descendants of immigrants was being absorbed into standard English. And this created enormous problems for me, and I think it would create even more problems now, because students would talking about white British students now, they would hand in essays full of grammatical errors. And I'd say, what are you saying here? And they'd say, oh, but you know what I mean. And I say, no, I don't know what you mean because you said something in a format that doesn't actually express what you were trying to say. So I was constantly trying to get UK-born white British students to read and write English properly. And I was seen as kind of being a bit of an authoritarian and pedantic person. I don't mind being pedantic. I'm not authoritarian. But, you know, what's going to happen now as, I mean, just to give you an example in spoken English, if somebody says to me, "How are you today?" I would say, "I'm very well, thank you. How are you?" An African student said to me, "Oh, that would completely freak me out. Because if you asked me how I was, I would say, I'm good." But in terms of English grammar, that is incorrect. But it is part of a living language, and indeed living languages. So, you know, I just wonder how, you know, a pedant, if you like, copes with this. If I was 25 years younger, what advice would you give me?
How interesting. Language is dynamic, language changes. Over to you, Joseph.
No, I'm going to reserve comment because I'm not sure I have any good news for Robert at all. So,
Language will change, and
Robert is not going to like my answer.
yeah, all the time there are changes, aren't there? So depends which world we live in. I'm aware here in Australia, I
The
sound.
example I used, Liz, I used most recently because people are going crazy. Right now in Jamaican English, standard Jamaican English, and many other Caribbean varieties, standard varieties of Caribbean English, people are using the past conditional for simple past. So they're saying, you know, I would have presented in the Black History conversations today, and I would have said that we are making progress on the language front. I say, well, did you do it or didn't you do it? Like, and they do mean they did it.
Yeah.
Now, you know, people are going crazy. And I say, look, just calm down. Well, I don't particularly like it, but I understand it when it's used. And I say, well, several decades ago, you know, you were expected to say, I shall return, I shall speak with you, etc. Now everybody is doing, I will return, I will speak with you. Nobody has died, you know, from the switchover, and we don't even notice it anymore. So it's a part of, you know, the dynamism of language that Liz spoke about. It's a constant negotiation that takes place as languages change out old things for new. And moreover, they have to serve the purposes of their users. And their users are diverse. They come from different backgrounds. They have different needs. They want to do different things. And so their language will reflect all of that.
One could say that
Right,
people...
that Garrett comes in next, and then Robert, and then we'll just go around, and everybody can have a last little session. Okay, Garrick?
Yeah, the point is about an explainer. I think is very good because often it is the case where other nationalities can draw down resources for a second language and interpretation, etc. And it's, you know, the assumption is that, you know, all Caribbean people speak English. They don't need that. But you know, it's a very good point that need to be made about the explainer, and so, you know, somebody having to explain what does that mean. I'll give you an example of that. Some years ago, I was called to a police station because a black man was arrested at the police station. They couldn't understand what he was saying, and he was, you know, he was making all these words coming out, you know, and it didn't mean anything. When I got to the police station and listened to what the man is saying, he was just swearing, you know, Jamaican bad words. Yeah, that's all it was. He was just cursing, right? And they didn't understand what these words mean. See? And that's what it was. And I couldn't even repeat some of the words, but the sergeant just thought that this man need somebody to actually translate what he's saying. As you would say, Liz, an explainer.
Interesting. Okay, then. So, thanks for that, Garrick. So, Lamesha, how would you like to wrap up this session? Thank you so much for your contribution, and your work is just amazing, so dynamic.
How just that the more we deny Jamaican patois or Jamaican national language, the more we are just consuming this colonial mindset and just becoming victims or just remaining victims to colonialism, whilst we have such a wealthy language that people are stealing from us. So let us claim and hold it for ourselves. And also Jamaican patois is at the heart of so many urban cities, languages, slang, because of how we exported the language, our culture, and it just shows how much of a demand there is for it. People are yearning for it, and we could be doing good for the Jamaican people and improving their education, job opportunities, and just showing them that Jamaican patois is a special skill to have. Thank you.
Fantastic. I don't know if you know of a lady, I think her name's Yvonne, I can't remember her other name. She wrote the dictionary in Japan of Jamaican to Japanese, and it doesn't include English at all. It's just absolutely fantastic. We did have a copy of it once upon a time, but it went to a home where somebody loved it more. I'm just going to ask Robert, would you just very briefly, what would your final comment be?
Well, I mean, my final comment would be that this is potentially the beginning of a very long conversation with Joseph. I mean, can I just say that he says that, language has to be adapted appropriately to the context. The context I was talking about was British higher education. And this has nothing to do with whether you're Jamaican or British. There is a kind of standard English which is necessary for clear explanations of complex ideas and for writing things for publication. And all students need to be able to comply with that, even if that's not how their everyday language works. I mean, I'm sure they're picking up.
It's a good point that you're making, Robert, but we're focusing at the moment on Jamaican as a language, not on the variations and difficulties that some English speakers have with using the kind of language that is necessary to use in an academic setting in the UK.
But that's also important for Jamaican speakers who come to Britain.
Well, yes, but that's kind
they
of
must have exactly the same
point.
problem.
And that's the point about being bilingual, because many of my Jamaican colleagues, I think, probably speak better English than I do, because they have made a special effort to speak English, not to speak Jamaican. I don't have to even think what comes out of my mouth under normal circumstances is in English. Okay, I'm just going to see if Ivor can join us. Now, Ivor, you're in Pennance, Jamaica. You've been listening in patiently. Ivor, you were a teacher in school in Jamaica. Can you unmute yourself? Are you focused at the moment?
Okay, I'm here now, yes.
Wonderful. So what do you think about this discussion? Speak to us in Jamaican, please. Pretend I'm not here. Speak to Joseph.
Please, I have that problem too, I do really stutter sometimes, so I'm not so talk plainly sometimes. So I would
Ivor, you make yourself
Probably,
understood very well indeed. You overcome your challenges.
sometimes.
So, Ivor, are you able to join us tomorrow at the Black History at the Jamaica North Wales Jamaica Society meeting?
No,
Oh, okay, don't worry.
mm,
But we'll catch up next week, Ivor.
yes,
Is there anything else you want to add?
Oh yes. What's her name again? They have a lady there who's here in Jamaica now. Who
Sorry. Yeah, say what it is about them.
April Louise. She's here now, you know. She's
Yeah.
coming down here on the 20th of this month. April Louise. April
Oh,
Louise.
Uncle Louise, she's coming to
Yeah.
see you.
Yes, on
Oh,
the 20th of this
fantastic.
month. 20th of this month, the 28th of this month.
Oh, good.
Yes, so we'll have making a reason for her now. For her place to stay and so on.
That's
Yeah.
very special. Well, we'll meet up next Thursday. I'll be
Yes.
feeling better by then, and then we'll be able to catch up on what we're doing in the Penance area on the
Sure.
project. Thanks,
Sure.
Ivor.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you, and I hope you didn't think I put you on the spot there.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Garrick, is there anything you want to add on?
No. I just think this conversation is so, it's so interesting just listening to, what Joseph has said. And I guess in maybe another year or two, we're going to be further down the road in arriving at, some sort of agreed, Jamaica standard Creole or Patois.
I don't know. I think Joseph feels in written terms that you've cracked it with the Cassidy approach to writing. Not that everybody uses Cassidy, but I think we'll leave the last word to you, Joseph. And then I'm just going to show a couple of slides about things we did in the past, because I just wanted to share that with you, Joseph.
Okay. 2 years is probably too early. Liz pointed out that too soon. Liz pointed out that we have a standard writing system. There's some pushback, but we believe it's a very simple system. It looks different from English, but what we didn't want to take over the baggage of, all of the irregularities in the English system. This system can be taught in a matter of minutes. Of course, you will need practice after that, but all of the principles can be taught in a matter of minutes, and we have done so in the past. Children learn it pretty fast, by the way. And in fact, a lot of people can read it even before they are taught it. This is something we have also tried. Now, there's a defeatist attitude when a lot of people think about the Jamaican language and where it is now, wondering, does it make sense to spend time, to spend resources on it? And I normally point to the English language, which several centuries ago was the language of peasants, was not a language that any, well-thinking person would want to, um, to admit to speaking in certain circumstances. If you were educated, then Latin and French were the languages for you. And look at us today fighting over the English language. And I think we can accomplish the same sort of thing for the Jamaican language. And in the same way that the development and spread of English has created lots of cultural, social, and economic opportunities for, I don't want to say English people, but, Anglo-Saxons. I believe that we can also have a piece of that pie. when the Jamaican language is developed and disseminated.
Yes, thank you so much. I cheekily put up this screen. So the bit that really fascinated me, because I can read Jamaican Language Unit, Department of Language, Linguistic and Philosophy, University of the West Indies. The bit that really interested me was why on earth the University of West Indies have got a crest with this in Latin. And I could hardly read it from the version that I've got, but I think you ought to translate that into Jamaican. I think that would be really good.
Orientex Occidentelos, or Occidente for some people.
What does it mean?
A light rising from the west.
Ah, right. Maybe we ought to change it altogether. Right, just then, thank you very much indeed for all of that. Just to say that when I look back through the records, it was back in 2004 when we started the Valuing Caribbean Languages project. And yes, we should have well, we were quite happy to accept all Caribbean languages. And when Professor Devonish came and spoke at our big conferences, it was amazing how he covered all the Caribbean languages. I think what I'm going to do is suggest we wrap up now, because I'm going to start coughing again. And we'll catch up with that and let you know more about it next week, perhaps. All right. Thank you so much to you both. Thank you, Robert, for joining us and being an active participant as
Thank you.
well as you, Garrick, and all the very best. And now I'm just going to finish off the session. Okay, then. Thanks, folks, very much indeed. Thank you.